Story 1. Beware, beware the creature's eye, she feeds from fear deep in your mind. The words carved into the cover of the disfigured leather journal. Remnants of arson gnawed on the edges of its half-burnt spine, and traces of murder stained the once freshly cut birch pages to the stench of rotting flesh. I closely examined the warning on the cover under the fading light of my candle. Too hard to be penetrated by quill, yet the engraving lacked the precision of a blade. The madman had dug his own nails into the book, as if the warning was for himself. I paced uneasily across my office, my thoughts overshadowed by the thundering storm raging outside and the demonic wails from the jail cell. The cries belonging to the once brilliant zoologist Dr. Hal, who now was held charge for the murder of his colleagues and the destruction of his own blown-up laboratory. I had involved myself with the most horrific killers and arsonists on the streets of my crime-infested city, yet there was just something about this case that haunted me, as if my investigation was shadowed by a sinister omen. My grip held tightly on the journal found in the mad doctor's possession upon his arrest. If the doctor kept his sanity long enough to maintain his conduct as a scientist, he would have recorded all his findings and observations, and his journal would be the key to unraveling the mystery. I considered myself a logical man. My logical mindset was a powerful and reliable tool I utilized to uncover my previous cases, yet I could not explain why I shuddered at the thought of the dark secrets I would uncover in the doctor's findings. "Tea," my assistant offered with an anxious gaze. "Please," I replied, as my fingers slowly slid under the front cover to reveal the first page. "I sense this night has much to offer." 10th August 1889. Upon my expedition in the sub-Saharan deserts, I happened to come across an archaeological discovery. I found myself in what seemed like a burial chamber, surrounded by strange symbols and drawings, possibly hieroglyphics from the language of an ancient kingdom. At the center of it all was what appeared to be the most curious statue I'd ever seen. I initially thought it to be a deity of an old civilization, a mythological goddess, a human-like body, 6 arms positioned as if ready to pounce onto prey with its spear-tipped claws, the body swarming with what appears to be eyelids mapped out like blood vessels. All eyes shut. All but one, the giant eye that envelops its entire face, from the right corner of its forehead to the left center of its chin, stretched open as if it were a python swallowing its prey whole. Within the eye, a set of 3 pupils and 3 irises streaking across like claw marks, 3 precise pinholes in the pupils jabbed through the head. Archaeology is beyond my field of studies. Statues and discoveries of such would be nothing worth recording in my reports. Yet something about this figure seems almost organic, as if it were once a living being, or rather, still is. I simply cannot rule out the possibility that I've discovered a new prehistoric species. As faint as the possibility may be, I must be certain it will be taken back to my lab for further analysis. 17th September 1889. The subject is truly fascinating. We've been working tirelessly, running numerous tests. The stones show properties of both fossilized carbon and decomposed tissue, yet it still seems too intricately preserved to not be a man-made structure. These may be the thoughts of a man showing first signs of becoming senile, but I could have sworn the statue was broken into more and smaller fragments when we first discovered it. A self-joining material, perhaps? If that were the case, my discovery could truly revolutionize the future of the modern world. I noticed the end of each following entry appeared to contain a tally. 53 I counted beneath the first, second, and third entries. The number at first seemed to remain a constant pattern, until a following entry ended with 52, then 49 a few entries later, until slowly reducing to 45. 7th October 1889. My suspicions were correct. There are fewer and fewer fragments on the stone, and the remaining pieces appear to be growing. The subject is self-healing. The material it consists of is indeed a self-repairing one. It appears to have a memory of its own to return to its original form. If anything, this further supports my theory that this was indeed once a living being, or perhaps still is. The archaeologist's letters were folded between the blood-stained pages, the bleeding ink blending among the red. I closely observed each mark on the page, reading carefully between the fragments that remained intact, decrypting as much of the message as I could make out. My dearest friend, hope this letter reaches you well. I'm writing to inform you that I've deciphered the inscriptions at the site of your discovery. The language is in fact Aramaic, and I must say, they're of a rather sinister nature. I, as much as you, am not one to believe in ancient curses or the paranormal of sorts. But if your theory stands correct, and it is indeed a fossil or a mummy, then I'd advise to heed these warnings with great caution. Inscriptions you found at the burial site speak of a most terrible creature who lingers in the shadows and feeds off fear and insanity. Legend goes, these creatures are the reason we fear the dark. They are the reason why we turn our heads towards the strange flicker in the corner of our eye, the reason why we hold our breath at the sound of creaks nearby. They are the reason why we search the corners of our homes for monsters, why we glance back at the empty corridor, waiting for something to appear. Humankind never needed such instincts to survive in the natural world, but we evolved to protect ourselves from creatures of their kind. They called these creatures Terufachlan, or loosely translated, insanity eater. I mouthed. A sudden gust barraged through the window without warning, extinguishing the flames of the dying candles. I shielded the notes with my body from the onslaught of rain pelleting through, and heaved the lever shut. The storm outside raged stronger, as if cowering in fear at the words that left my mouth. If I believed them to be true, then this would mark the sign of a sinister omen. I continued through the journal under the fading traces of moonlight through the window. 10th October, 1889. I've identified the material, and my first guess was correct. The subject appears to be an exoskeleton of some sort. Perhaps I've spent too much time with the subject, or my friend's message has my mind playing tricks on me. But it's the most peculiar thing. If I stand close, my breaths seem to echo back to me from within the subject. And if I listen carefully, it's almost as if I can hear it calling my name. Inspector ... I froze at the ghostly whisper in my office. I could sense it. It wasn't merely the murmur of the wind. Something had entered the room. I held my breath and slowly shifted my gaze onto the figure before me. Your tea, sir. Made you a strong cuppa to plough through the night. You gave me quite a fright, I chuckled. Didn't hear you come in. Well, you left the door open, sir. Thought you'd be expecting me. I raised an eyebrow at my assistant, gesturing my confusion. I hadn't left my desk since I began reading. Thank you, I said firmly. Now I must continue without further disturbance, so please don't forget to close the door on your way this time. Didn't forget, sir. I know how hacked off you get about it. I immediately dismissed the thought of an unearthly phenomenon at play. I couldn't let my assistant's carelessness compromise my logical mentality. I took a few deep breaths to regain my focus and continued through the journal. 2nd November, 1889. I've named the subject Eve. Though I regard myself and my methods as rigorously logical, my reasoning on this instance simply does not concur. Just as the periodic table fell into place in Mendeleev's sleep, this name simply appeared in a vivid dream, one I cannot recall having. Eve, the mother of all mankind. Whatever this creature once was, I may be the first to have discovered her kind. I only await my good friend's word of confirmation. One thing I failed to notice before, it seems to have a second eye open on the lower back of her neck. I'm not sure how I missed it after many thorough inspections. I ridicule the thought, yet cannot help but wonder if somehow the subject's Eve's eye was in fact closed from the beginning and had only just opened now. Silence. The unearthly cries from the jail cell came to a sudden halt. Had he grown tired of the screaming? Number something felt wrong. Disturbed by the lingering suspense, I beckoned my assistant to check upon the mad doctor before I continued deciphering the archaeologist's second message. My dearest friend, letter reaches you in good health. I myself have not been. I've remained awake for many days now, unable to sleep, haunted by... We've studied the sample you kindly sent us, and we can confirm your theory correct. It is indeed the remnants of a once living creature. Deciphered more of the messages left by the ancient tribe and bring information on the nature of your creature. Few have seen its true form and lived to tell the tale. What you see before you is merely a vessel, a human it last occupied, undergoing metamorphosis to change into the creature's true form. I've had my artists recreate the images we found at the burial, which I have enclosed within this letter. I must warn you, the image haunts me even in sleep. I clutched my grip on the archaeologist's letter, trembling violently, staring wide-eyed at the horror before me. A swarm of eyes wrapped around like blood vessels over its twisted and tangled body, wrapped by its 6 arms clawing out like the branches of a dead tree. It stood on its 4 raveling tentacles, spread like splattered blood across all corners of the page. But its most horrifying feature, the eye that fissured its face in 2 halves like an open jaw, its lashes spiked out like the teeth of a great white, with the 3 distinct pupils and irises streaked across like claw marks. 12th November, 1889. Another eye has opened. I now realize the subject is neither mummified nor a fossil. She's alive. My mug shattered on the ground as I was thrown back, mortified by the horror of the next entry. She's in my dreams. She's in my dreams. The words repeated over and over, page after page, forming lines, then spirals, then spiraling into the shape of an eye. In his frenzy, he began to draw other strange symbols and shapes, with letters clumping together. When the ink ran dry, the doctor started carving the letters into the book, until finally his frenzy ended on a double page, with words that sent chills down my spine. And she is beautiful. 21st November, 1889. I write this war. The entry was missing, torn off by the doctor in his frenzy. I shuddered at the twisted thoughts the madman must have recorded as I read the final entry in the doctor's journal. 1st December, 1889. More of her eyes have opened. She is breaking from her slumber and will roam the shadows once more. I cannot allow anyone to disturb her as she recovers her true form. She tells me I am blessed to become her new vessel. She will awaken, and she will feast on mankind's insanity forevermore. He's dead, cried my assistant as she slammed open the office door. Her face was petrified with dread, her arms rigid, shaking uncontrollably. He ain't breathing. His heart ain't beating. I don't know what to do. Help him. I grabbed my lantern and keys and darted after my assistant. I stopped at the door of my office and looked back at my desk, focusing on the hardback journal that lay ominously still, as if it were beckoning me. I grabbed the book and sprinted after my assistant. Holding the lantern in my trembling grip, I fixed my eyes on the inert body of the doctor, waiting for any sign of movement. But he lay there, catatonic. "Call the paramedics," I commanded as my assistant raced down the hallway. Her footsteps faded into silence as she was consumed by the darkness. I was alone. Eyes transfixed on the doctor, I cautiously turned the lock on the cell door, my hands as cold as the steel that held the madman within. In case the doctor suddenly attacked, I left the door slightly ajar, just wide enough for an escape. For me, however, it would be my gravest and final mistake. I gently turned the doctor onto his back, slowly crouching down to shine the flickering, fading light on his face. I held my gaze on his cold, dead expression, Reaching for his clenched fist to feel for a pulse, I found no pulse, only a note. I reached into the doctor's fist for the crumpled ball of paper. I noticed the torn corner and unfurled the note, realizing it matched the missing entry in the notebook. Holding the missing pieces against each other, I dreaded the dark secrets I would uncover. 21st November, 1889. I write this warning while I am still able to hold the final fragments of my sanity. She has taken my mind hostage. She lives within the depths of my fear, my insanity, feeding off it. For now, she only exists as fragments in the minds of those who have gazed through her eyes. She cannot be allowed to recover her true form. As long as she continues to repair her former vessel, she will grow stronger as each eye opens and feeds. Forgive me. It is too late to save them. I must sever her connections to all who have fallen prey to her gaze. I must take drastic actions to prevent her from invading our world again by any means necessary. My final warning, do not gaze through her eyes. It uses its eyes to trap its prey and latch onto their minds. Once her eye is embedded in its host, she hooks herself into the victim's brain and projects herself in the shadows, triggering fear and paranoia within her victim, feeding off their insanity. Those who gaze through the holes pierced through her eyes fall prey to her grasp. She has taken control of my mind, and she has made me draw her image in the book. Do not look through the image. Even that which holds the image of her eye falls under her gaze. The final words echoed in my mind. Overwhelmed by dread, I frantically flicked back page after page to where the insanity took its hold on the doctor. Beware, beware the creature's eye. The warning droned repeatedly in my mind. It was there. My hands quaked with fear as I fixed my wide-eyed gaze on the ink-bombed pages. Even that which holds the image of her eye, too, falls under her gaze. 3 holes pierced through the dead center. The letters shaped into 3 distinct irises and 3 pupils, all slashed across from the right corner of the double page down to the left, taking the form of an eye, her eye. I tore the pages of the journal, clawing away in frantic spasm. I dug my nails deep into the blood-stained pages and slashed my way through the book. I slammed down my foot repeatedly, fracturing its spine, crushing the clawed hardback leather. With a final blood-curdling bellow, I smashed my lantern over the shredded remnants and set ablaze the cursed notebook. Gasping desperately for air, having escaped from drowning under waves of terror, my eyes flickered with the flames that engulfed the cursed ink and blood-painted pages of the journal. "Too late, Inspector," whispered the voice from within me. The doctor's body flung upwards, stretching and twisting into knots. Cracks appeared throughout, tearing his fibers open to reveal a swarm of eyes blinking furiously, rolling from corner to corner in unison. His pale blue, strained skin blackened into an abyss of shadow, and his face fissured its jaws open to reveal its eye. Its lashes spiked out like the teeth of a great white, with the 3 distinct pupils and irises streaked inside like claw marks. "You've fallen prey to my piercing gaze, and now I forever remain within the depths of your mind. I am free again. I will be every shadow, every whisper of the wind, every sudden movement in the corner of your eye, every monster in every corner you look, in every empty corridor waiting to appear, and your every nightmare." A flash of lightning illuminated the room, and the wind howled through the barred window of the jail cell, extinguishing the flames as the hungry darkness consumed the final flickering traces of light. Story 2. Gillian stumbled haphazardly through the ghost-white birch trees. Their shadows cast prison bars across the leaf-strewn forest floor, with only beams of moonlight to pierce the veil of darkness. I winced as crisp leaves and twigs crunched and snapped under my feet. The breeze blew just hard enough to elicit a shiver as it made branches send more leaves spiraling down into my hair. I shivered again, feeling eyes on my back, sensing I was being watched. I could hear quiet, sinister words among the whisper of the swaying trees. Freezing and standing perfectly still as a stone statue, I paused. Dread built up in my heart, my stomach squeezed with knots. They were everywhere. They were watching me. They were coming for me. And for no discernible reason, they hated me. Jill, honey, would you like to hear a story? My mum slowly opened the door to find me, 8 years old, playing tea party with my stuffed toys. Jumping up in excitement, I abandoned the tea party on the floor to hop into bed. Fables again? She laughed. I nodded and squeezed my favorite stuffed animal, a fluffy yellow cow named Moo, in anticipation. I was a sweet little girl with short curly black hair like my MIA father and pale skin and blue eyes like my mother. I adored fables and stories, especially ones with cute talking animals. I loved animals and wished for a pet, though our apartment complex wouldn't allow it. I liked to imagine myself as a princess from the stories, living in a forest cottage with little animals to play with. Every night, my mother would read me a story and promise to read me another one the next night, until one night for the very first time she didn't. My mother, Annette Polken, was a tired woman. Her straight, dark brown hair had begun to streak grey, the only sign of age to an otherwise pale, youthful face. Being a single mother and working hard to support herself and me had taken a toll. Because of this, she was always looking for a big break. So when she went into my room that night, instead of a story, she had great news. Annette's mother had finally decided it was time to go live out the rest of her years in a senior citizen centre, leaving Annette and me her small country home. Ecstatic to get out of the city and the dingy, overpriced apartment, we began packing right away. Annette had already located a job near our new home, and as soon as we could leave, we never looked back. Certain we had found our story's happy ending. It was autumn, and I watched as a coloured curtain of leaves flew up as we drove on the twisting forest road. Crossing a bridge that went over a stream, I watched the hazy sunlight glint off the ripples. My legs bounced to the soft music my mother had on the radio as I propped Moo up in the window beside me. To me, it felt as if the trip had taken several hours, but when we finally pulled up to our new home, I thought I would burst with joy. It was a 2-story house made of red brick with lots of windows. I was immediately reminded of the eldest pig's house in the story of the 3 little pigs. It was surrounded by a dense forest of birch trees and had a large, crumbling stone fountain in the front that didn't work and was filled with soggy leaves. The forest looked like the ones from my stories, the kind that contained princess cottages, fairies, and happy critters. With the last bit of sunlight, my mother unloaded all our few possessions. Thankfully, Annette's mother had left us the old family furniture, so we didn't have to worry about that. While she worked on this, I ran around the house, inspecting every nook and cranny. For the first night, I slept on the same bed with my mother, intimidated by the building much larger than the apartment I grew up in. In the morning, my mother had to go to work for her first day. I was used to being by myself when my mom went to work, but my mother's rule had changed from "don't leave the house under any circumstances" to "you may leave the house but can't go far." I really had to fight for that one, and gladly went exploring in the woods right off the bat, taking my favorite stuffed animal Moo with me, of course. It was the first time I'd been in real woods and not just the city park, the sheer number of towering trees filling me with awe. Weak sunlight filtered through the leaves as I laughed, climbing over logs and skipping over rocks, making sure to always keep the red brick house in sight. As I got further, I began to falter. Something didn't seem right, though I couldn't really pinpoint it. I continued on more cautiously before realizing what it was. It was too quiet, too still. Maybe it was because I was used to the noisy, flashy city, but something felt very wrong. There were no whistling birds or chattering squirrels like I had expected, not a single sign of wildlife. I reasoned it was because my playing had scared them off, but I couldn't shake the ominous feeling. I quickly ran back to the house and waited for my mom. deciding I wouldn't tell her for fear of being silly and that my mum would reason not to let me outside anymore. As the sun began to set, lighting the sky pink and purple, I watched from an upper story window as my mum pulled up. With a sigh of relief, I slid down the stairs to greet her, only realizing as I got to the door that I didn't have Moo. I had left him in the woods. The next day I planned a search mission. Popping on a backward baseball hat and putting on my overalls, I grabbed a magnifying glass to look for clues and a small satchel to carry it. Heading out the front door, I tried to follow the same path I took yesterday. Though I attempted to be much quieter, the woods stayed just as silent in return, without a single bird call to interrupt it. Stepping over the same logs and rocks I did last time, I became very worried for Moo. Luckily for me, it didn't take very long to find him, or at least his head. I barely contained a gasp at the sight. The stuffed animal's head had been torn off its body and stuck on top of a sharp stick wedged in the ground. Stuffing trailed around on the ground below it with no body in sight. I lightly brushed my fingers over its soft yellow fabric and with a sniffle, tugged the head off the stick and placed it in my bag. At the same moment, I heard laughter. Light, malicious laughter that came from everywhere and nowhere. Racing back to the house, I stumbled over roots, eliciting only more muffled, evil giggling. The red house got closer and closer, but as I broke out into the open, I saw a fox sitting in the middle of the driveway, stopping me in my tracks. Picking up the nearest stick as a weapon, I waited for it to run off, feeling like I would explode with fear and tension. It only blinked at me, cocking its head. It got up and trotted forward, stopping when I stepped back, raising the stick. Flipping its ears back, it looked almost disappointed before turning and bounding gracefully into the underbrush. A minute later, I heard a vehicle as my mom came around the bend in the road, parking and stepping out. "Hey, look who got home early. Are you playing adventurer or something?" Gillian didn't want to go into the woods again the next day. In truth, I was afraid. Who was in the woods? Who hurt my stuffed animal and laughed and laughed and laughed? I sat by the upstairs window contemplating this when I glimpsed a flash of red movement below. A fox, possibly the same as yesterday, sat in front of the house looking straight up at me. A little disconcerted by its presence, I leaned against the glass to see it better. Bang, I almost tumbled out of my seat as a large blackbird hit the window, flapping its wings crazily and scattering inky feathers everywhere before landing on the sill. Its beady eyes pierced into mine as it began to peck, peck, peck at the glass. Down below, the fox paced intensely, with me not knowing what to do. Then the bird started whispering at me, inaudible chatter that sent chills up my spine. Snatching the curtains shut, I regained my ability to move and ran downstairs, grabbing the broom by the door and peeking out of the large living room window. The fox was still there, but closer to the house now, staring at me, knowing I was there. He wasn't the only one who knew where I was at, though. The blackbird, along with another, landed on the sill, pecking at the glass, while a chipmunk and 2 squirrels climbed. Up beside them, furiously pawing and scratching at the window. All the while they whispered. They murmured and chattered and laughed. Then a squirrel screamed as blood splattered the window and it hung limply in the fox's jaws before dropping like a stone. The fox repeatedly leaped up, snapping at the animals with its sharp teeth and scaring them away. It ran back to the woods, sitting on the edge of the tree line, keeping watch. My mother would be home soon, and I took the opportunity to run out with the broom and a rag to wash off the window, returning inside as fast as possible. "Jill, honey, why are all the curtains shut? It's so dark in here." I felt like I couldn't tell my mother about any of this. Without Moo, I was all on my own. I didn't trust the fox. In fables, foxes were bad guys. Sly, greedy, devious creatures that could never be trusted. Still, every day from then on, he sat by the fountain, where it seemed like he was waiting for me. After 3 days, I climbed up on the kitchen counter, armed myself with a knife from the block, and leaning out the kitchen window above the sink, tried to speak to the fox. "Mr. Fox, You are a boy, right? I asked hesitantly, only leaning as far out of the unscreened window as I dared. He nodded in turn, so I took that as a sign to continue. Can you talk as well? Why are all these animals being so mean to me? Are you trying to help? I asked almost desperately, and tried not to get my hopes up or get tricked. After a long pause, he sighed. Yes, I can talk, he began, as he wrapped his tail neatly over his paws. My name is Ruse. I'm trying to help you because I'm the only one that can. But why are they doing this to me? I whispered fearfully, knowing they were listening, always listening. Because they can. I do not know. Perhaps they think you are weak prey, and they are after your flesh, he said with an unmistakable grin. At this I jerked back. Then how can I trust you not to be the same? I huffed, gripping the knife against my unknown threats. You ask too many questions, he answered, licking a paw delicately. Slamming the window, I resolved to avoid him along with the others. My mother woke me up in the morning with absolutely dreadful news. She had the day off, so she wanted to go on a fun hike together. Hoping the animals would leave me alone with a strong grown-up present, I reluctantly agreed, not wanting to seem very suspicious. It was a lovely sunny day with nearly no clouds and little to no wind. As we walked, my mother commented on the pretty bird song and pointed to some squirrels scrambling up trees, even a rabbit hopping across the trail. My mother didn't see the animals stop suddenly as if they were statues, slowly swiveling their heads to stare with their beady eyes as I looked back. Then naturally they scampered and fluttered off again as my mother turned around too. I tried my best not to cling to my mother's jacket, asked to go home, asked to move somewhere else even. I didn't know if the animals merely wanted to scare me or had a more vile intent. These were not the jolly, helpful animals I had dreamed of. They were evil, and I was more a prisoner than a princess. It was as I was lost in these thoughts that I realized my mom had walked quite a ways ahead. I rushed to keep up, but barely made it 5 steps before a large creature barreled out of the bushes next to me. Not a sound was able to come out of my mouth before everything went black. Sirens. In the distance, I heard the barely audible shriek of sirens. My eyes needed to adjust to the dark, but when I opened them, I saw a doe standing a few feet away. Sitting up carefully, I rubbed my head, feeling very nauseous. Gazing around, I saw I was in a clearing next to an old well made of large, broken bricks. Wobbly, I stood up, using the well wall to hold steady. That's when I saw the well was full of bones. Animal or human was hard to tell. Unable to comprehend the sight, I backed away, clamping a hand over my mouth. The deer, alerted by the sound, stomped forward threateningly. Without a thought, I picked up nearby bricks and branches, hurling them at my captor. Twisting around, I took off into the dark woods by the light of the moon. I didn't think the deer had given chase, but I hurried all the same, tripping on a root in the process and hurting my ankle. The sirens had stopped, but I headed in the direction I had heard them. I could still hear the whispering chatter of animals, but I tried to ignore it over my pounding headache. Suddenly, there he was. Ruse, is that you? I whispered between panted breaths as I saw a fox sit, washed in moonlight, ahead of me in the middle of the trail. He nodded and seemingly beckoned with his tail to follow. Too tired and lost to question it, I limped after, giving in to accepting his suspicious offer of help. Many minutes passed as I followed the white-tail tip through dense undergrowth, brushing aside plants and spider webs. When we finally made it out onto the main trail, I knew we only had a little more to go, especially now that I could hear the sounds of multiple people calling my name, searching for me. I started to smile because the nightmare was almost over, but that's when a badger crashed through the bushes up ahead, a vicious-looking thing with long claws and a big body. He's old, desperate, and hungry. We can take him, Jill, Ruse said quickly as I snatched up a rock to throw. Are you out of your mind? I whispered angrily. We can run. I just want to go home. I broke off, sniffling as tears began leaking from my eyes. It turned out we didn't have a choice as the badger charged forward in desperation, heading right for me. Ruse rammed into his side, sending him sprawling across the ground, kicking up dirt and leaves. He shook, charging again only for Ruse to pounce on his back and bite savagely at his throat and face. They tumbled in a heap and the fierce fight settled soon enough, leaving the old badger slumped but breathing. "Now, Jill, you need to kill him. Use that sharp stone you have there," he puffed with labored breathing. "But Ruse," I pleaded, tears streaming down my face. "No. If you want the animals to leave you alone, if you want this to end, you'll do it," he growled ferociously. Scared, I crawled toward the badger, holding the jagged rock so tight I thought it would cut my palm. Lifting it high, I faltered, looking to Ruse, who seemed to grin sadly. "I won't be able to talk to you after this. Trust me. You're not the first kid this has happened to, and I'm sorry." "What do you mean, Ruse?" "The animals do this because we feed off innocence. It's been a long time since we've gotten a meal. Some of us are very desperate," he said quietly, gesturing to the old badger. "They like to scare their victims straight, bleed your innocence dry and kill you. I don't want to kill kids, believe it or not, and so I help them kill first. Either way, I'll lose my innocence?" I gulped, my hands beginning to shake. "Yes, but this way, you don't pay with your life," he finished, staring me down as if he could force my hand. Staring back as if it were a contest, I suddenly whipped around, plunging the rock into the animal's neck. "I see her! There she is!" Annette yelled to the nearby police as she rushed forward. The spotlights illuminated a silhouette in the trees of a little girl limping forward. Blood sprayed on her clothes and a determined look in her eye. She was no little girl, not a princess, a prisoner, or a child. She was Gillian. Story 3. Boxes littered the living room floor as far as I could see. I pulled one down from the stack that had built up. If truth be told, I had started to build a fort. Childish, yes, I know, but I needed something to entertain myself. Maybe this was why she was leaving. I sat myself down upon it to watch the news report. With most of the furniture already gone, my sister's words rang out in my head. "Look on the bright side, bro. Things can't get any worse." Oh, but they can, I thought, and just had. The reporter's message rang out that the country was on a nationwide lockdown. Quick images flew across the screen of people being stretchered into hospitals, people collapsing in the street, and the army rolling into town, taking up positions and building barricades. The army, I thought. This all seemed a bit over the top. This all happened very quickly. Yes, there were rumors, murmurs even, that something was going on. Reports of people falling ill had risen, but they told us not to panic. Yeah, right. How quickly this had all changed. I didn't get a chance to catch the rest of the report as to what they assumed had caused the sudden rise in the virus. My wife's booming voice began to drown out the TV as she got up from the one armchair I had managed to claim. And yes, as it stood at this moment in time, she was still my wife. "Well, that's just great, isn't it?" she said, storming past me, trying her best not to make contact as if I was infected. "Just great," she shouted, slamming the bedroom door of the little two-bed flat we owned. It wasn't much, but it was ours. A place to begin married life together and to start our own little family. Our love nest, as she once called it. That had been 2 years ago now, in such happier times. They were becoming harder to remember. Somehow, I had the feeling that this was all going to be my fault. Crazy, I know, but my fault nonetheless, just like everything else had been over the last 6 months. My attention was once again drawn to the TV. A tall, balding man in a nice suit stood at a plinth, using a lot of words that I had no idea what they meant, also over-talking with his hands, not sure if this was making him feel important. Don't get me wrong, I didn't think of myself as stupid. My wife would probably say otherwise and had, but a dictionary wouldn't have gone amiss right now. I'm sure they threw half these words in to try and calm you down, to make you think that they knew what they were talking about. Then, just as quickly as it had started, it was over. All the panic that once filled the screen was now just a notice board. Please stay indoors. Keep all windows and doors closed. If you feel unwell, call 111 and someone will get back to you. If you need supplies, call 555 and we will get them to you. ASAP action will be taken against anyone found outside. Follow these rules and this will all be over very soon. More to follow. Stay safe. The sun was beating down, not a cloud in the sky. Damn, it was hot. Days like this, I wished we had saved a little more and got a nice little house with a garden. Nothing great, just a small patch of grass and a little patio area, just enough to soak up the rays. I don't think I could have spent any more time at the in-laws though. All we had was a balcony. It wasn't much, 2 chairs and a table, and you were pretty much done for space. The view wasn't all that either. Concrete everywhere you looked. It would be nice to have a garden, but I suppose none of that mattered anymore now. I leaned over the side and scanned the surrounding streets. Man, it was quiet. Not a sound, not a car, voice, or even a dog barking. Just total silence. It was creepy, started to feel like something straight out of a horror movie. "What do you think you are doing?" came the voice from the doorway. Even with that stern, evil look on her face, she was the most radiant, beautiful person I had ever seen. "They said keep all windows and doors shut, and you're sitting out here putting us both in danger." She turned around and stormed off. "Idiot," was the final word I heard before it became just a mere grumble. Well, at least she was talking to me now. I was never one to sleep in, even more so in the last few months. I had been relocated to the spare room. A 6-foot-plus man cramped into a put-up bed, waking up alone wasn't much incentive to stay in bed. I had started to do an inventory for food to see what we had. I had come across some eggs and bacon, and I knew we had some bread somewhere. Now, all I needed was some beans, and we had ourselves a party. I rummaged around the kitchen, finding pots and pans that had been boxed. I opened a few more boxes and found all I needed. While breakfast cooked away, I laid the table. "What's this?" she said, drying her hair with a small towel. It was part of a set we had brought back from our annual holiday to Yarmouth. "I really like the colours," I recalled her saying, and me arguing that we had brought a case full of towels with us, and of course I lost and we bought them. "Why have you gone through the boxes?" "It's breakfast," I replied, "and I needed things to cook with." "You have things. We sorted that out." I let out a sigh, not wanting to argue again. "Please just sit. Please." I pointed to one of the rickety dining room chairs. Thinking about it now, I hadn't fared too well with the whole separating stuff, but I felt that this was not the time to bring it up as she sat down. We hadn't sat down at the table together for months. I had forgotten how it felt. It felt nice. I looked across towards her, and even with a mouthful of food and frizzy hair, she looked beautiful. She tucked into the eggs and bacon and seemed to enjoy it. I had never been much of a cook, but I had learned quickly of late. In fact, I hadn't been much of anything. I had spent most of my days in the last year working, and my nights in the pub. Maybe this was why she was leaving. "I have started to do a stock take on the food we have," I blurted out to break the ice. "Sounds a good idea," came the muffled reply. "Yeah, I thought so. You know, just in case." "Has anything else been reported on the news?" she said, glancing up from her plate. "No," I replied, as I quickly tried to swallow what I had in my mouth. "Just the same as before." "I suppose no news is good news," she said, looking back down at her plate, finishing the last of her breakfast. With that, the conversation was over, as was the breakfast. "Thank you," she said, standing up from the table. "It's okay. I'll deal with that," I said, pointing towards her plate. "Oh, okay, thank you," she said. walking past me and back towards the bedroom. I finished off the last few bites of my bacon and smiled to myself. It wasn't much, but it was nice. A few days passed by. The little glances grew along with the occasional smile. The conversation wasn't much, but it was pleasant and nice. It was a start. I turned on the TV to check the afternoon news, but once again, just as it had been the day before, there was none. All that came up were the same details as before. More to follow. When? I thought. The noise outside drew me onto the balcony. I looked around, but I could not see anything. Something was going on, and it was close. It was another scorching day. Maybe the hottest yet, I thought. Far too good to be stuck inside, but what could we do? What could we do? I searched through several of the boxes. Ah, there it is. The big yellow towel I'd been looking for, another holiday purchase. I took it and laid it across the balcony floor. With the 2 chairs and the small table, there wasn't much room, but enough for what I needed. I placed 2 bowls of water in front of the chairs and then went back in to find the finishing touches. I called out down the corridor, "You might want to see this," and made my way to the balcony. I heard the bedroom door open and the thumping of feet on the floor. "What is it? Has something happened?" she said as she made her way onto the balcony. I thought I said... And then she stopped as she took in the sight before her and let out a little laugh. My heart melted. I hadn't heard that for what seemed like a lifetime. Oh, how I had missed that sound. "What's this?" "Please sit," I said, pointing towards one of the chairs. "But..." "No buts. Just sit, please." I quickly cut in as I took her by the hand and helped her to her seat. "This is about the time we would usually go away." "Well, we haven't for..." "So, we can't go to the beach, so I have brought the beach to you," I said as I handed her a drink of sorts, some sort of concoction that I had thrown together. "What's in this?" she asked as she took a sip. "Probably best not to ask, but it's got a little umbrella, so it's sophisticated," I added as we both laughed. As I sat down next to her, I bent down and removed her shoes and placed her feet into the bowl of water. "See, now you can paddle your feet in the sea." "I can't believe you have done all this," she smiled. "Oh wait, hang on a minute," I said as I clicked a button on a stereo next to me, and out played the sounds of the beach, waves crashing, seagulls singing. "Close your eyes," and you were there. She pointed to the corner of the balcony. "Is that..." "Yes, the bucket and spade you made me buy on the wettest day of the year." She laughed and took another sip of her drink, pulling a very sour face. "Well, I wanted to build a sandcastle. And as I recall, you did," I said as we both chuckled. To everyone else's amusement, I looked across at her. "If I remember, you even paddled your feet in the sea." "You always have to paddle your feet in the sea when you go to the beach," she said, raising her feet out of the bowl and smiling. "I'm sure we even had an ice cream." "Yeah, that wasn't one of my best ideas." We both broke into laughter. The afternoon passed along nicely. A few more drinks, some more reminiscing, some great chat, and a lot of laughing. On one of the many laughs, we locked eyes. This is the moment, I thought. I was nervous. I had kissed this woman thousands of times, but this time I was nervous, just like it was the first time all over again. As I moved in, she moved in as well. Butterflies circled my stomach, but it felt great knowing that she wanted to as well. Just as our lips were about to lock, there was a massive bang. We both sprung up and peered over the balcony. The army was moving in. We had been seen. "Inside now," came the call from the ground. "Windows and doors should be locked," was the last thing we heard as we jumped back inside, laughing like naughty school kids. "Oops," I said as we both continued laughing. "I think we might be in trouble." Our eyes locked once more. "Thank you for this," she said. "It was fun." "Well, who doesn't like going to the beach?" I said. And with that, she made her way back to the bedroom, stroking my arm on the way. "I'm glad you had fun," I called out after her. I rifled through some of the boxes in my room labeled clothes. I know it is in here somewhere. There it is. I pulled out a black tux that I had bought once for a casino night. I didn't own a suit, but this would do. I tried it on. It still fit. Well, a little bit snug, but again, it would do. I knocked on the door with some half-dead flowers in my hand. As she opened it, she laughed. "What are you wearing and why?" "I was wondering if I might take you out for dinner." "What?" "Please, come on," I said, ushering her out of the room. "Oh, and these are for you." I handed her the flowers. "They're lovely, thank you," she said as we made our way to the kitchen. "Wow." She stood there looking around. Candles filled every side. Music played out in the background. 2 places were set at the table, plates and cutlery laid out. A wedding gift from my Aunt Hilda. The truth was, it wasn't the nicest, but it was what I was left with in the split. "Ah, but the best is yet to come," I said, as I removed the silver plate cover to reveal beans on toast. "Tonight's special for my lady." "Oh, why, you shouldn't have," she smiled. I picked up a pot from the table. "Seasoning, it's grated cheese, but you know." "Thank you, sir, I will," she said, as I sprinkled some onto her plate. I picked up a bottle of wine. "Would the lady like to try the house red?" Story 4. So I stirred the sickly green tea in my mug, watching the bag bob up and down in murky suspension. I took a sip, cringed, and grunted in disgust. Far from being satisfying, it tasted like wet grass and regret. I sighed and left the break room, entering the office corridor and pressing the elevator button with the same tired resignation I'd applied to my 3rd cup that morning. The mirrored elevator doors reflected a man worn thin, tired eyes and a mouth set in a permanent downturn. I tried not to look at the strands of premature grey creeping over my ears. I took another sip of my matcha, forcing myself to swallow, trying not to think of how closely the drink resembled something I once scraped off the wheels of my lawnmower. Sighing heavily, I glanced at my watch. I'd had back-to-back meetings all morning and hadn't felt needed for any of them, having so far only sat silently, taking notes and nodding as higher-ups talked in circles for an hour while ultimately saying nothing. Just a few more years, I reminded myself for the millionth time. A few more years proving yourself, then you'll be promoted to manager, then director, then you'll have made it. I took another sip of matcha and grimaced, struggling between forcing myself to swallow or spitting it out. It was a few moments before I noticed the old man who had come to stand beside me, waiting for the elevator. He looked sideways at me and grinned. "Just switched to tea, eh?" I forced myself to finally swallow and nodded. Yeah." The old man chuckled and said, "That look on your face. Oof. You're a coffee guy, am I right?" I examined his face. He was ancient, likely pushing 90, but he wasn't a senior executive or even on the board. I'd memorized all their faces, not really in the mood to make small talk with some random old guy. I just nodded. "Thought so," the old man continued conversationally. "Let me guess, it wasn't your idea." I frowned down at the tea in my hand and said, "My girlfriend suggested it." "Ah, another young pup just doing as he's told." The old man chuckled again. "It's a shame you don't know how to think for yourself." I bristled slightly at the remark, but didn't want to cause a scene at work by telling this guy off. So I forced myself to remain silent by drinking more matcha. The old man looked sideways at me and shook his head in disappointment. "Nothing? Pity. I hoped you had more spine than that." I turned to face him, my brows pressing together as I clenched a fist. "What's your problem?" I demanded angrily. He laughed. "That's more like it. I knew there was still someone alive in there." The old man poked me in the chest and laughed again. I sneered and turned back to the elevator, wondering just what the hell was taking the damn thing so long. "You'll be waiting a long time if you just stand here," the old man said. "Feel free to take the stairs," I snapped. I don't mean the elevator, kid, the old man said, suddenly serious. Your goals, your dreams, I assume you have some. Let me tell you, no one ever got anywhere by just waiting. You got to find it yourself. Yeah, well, no one's told me where else to look yet, so, I replied coldly. And you're just waiting to be told, eh? Want the world to just hand you everything you want? That's the problem with you kids. You think your dreams just come true on their own. I exhaled sharply, having had enough of being lectured by a stranger of no importance. I opened my mouth, ready to tell the old guy exactly what I thought. Then something was pressed into my chest, a folded sheet of paper, bronzed by time. Lucky for you, kid, the old man whispered conspiratorially. That's exactly how your world works today. What is this? I asked suspiciously, my anger suddenly replaced with confusion. I carefully peeled back a corner of the folded paper. It looked like trash to me. I wondered if the old man was simply crazy. That, young blood, is a map, the old man said, pointing at the paper. A map to a priceless reward. I can tell by looking at you that you're not where you want to be in life. You follow that map and your life will be forever changed. This is a joke, right? I asked. You're giving me a treasure map. What is this, Uncharted? It's okay, young blood, the old man grinned. I didn't believe at first either when a stranger handed me that thing. Took me 37 years to take it seriously, wasted a lot of time. But if I knew then what I know now, I wouldn't have hesitated for a second. The intense sincerity with which the man spoke made me uneasy, but at the same time, I felt a rush of excitement course through me. Even if the man was crazy, this was the most interesting thing that had ever happened to me, so why not play along? Okay then, I began, slowly unfolding the supposed map, deciding to humor the man for now. What's this reward? And why didn't you take it yourself? No, boy, I did take it, the old man insisted. Everyone gets their own reward. That map you're holding will guide you to a place that exists on no other map. From there, it will show you the way through the maze. Maze? I repeated, still not sure if I should be taking this seriously or not. Yes, or a labyrinth more like. The map will lead you to the center, where you can claim your personal reward, but there's a condition to claim it. You have to pay it forward. I stared down at the map in my hands. It was so fragile, worn thin, and creased with countless folds. It felt like it was going to crumble to dust in my hands. The old man turned and began walking away, just as the elevator dinged to announce its arrival. What you do next is up to you, but take some free advice. Don't waste half your life wondering about it. Over the following days, I kept telling myself the old man was crazy. A treasure map? Ridiculous. But a part of me was intrigued. Even more so when I asked around the office for the old man and no one seemed to have ever seen him. I couldn't really explain why I decided to listen to the old man in the end, but I left my home and began my search. I didn't tell anyone where I was going. I took all the vacation days I had, then took off. After weeks of travel, all doubts about the map vanished as I found the place it led to. I stood in a forgotten valley as the sun began to fall behind the horizon, looking in awe at the towering dark walls before me. They stretched infinitely to the left and right of where I stood, fading into the dwindling light in the distance and even stretching into the darkening sky. An archway towered over me, a gaping mouth that marked the entrance to this place. I almost expected lightning to split the sky. How could this monolith go undiscovered? Who had built it and why? These questions and countless more swirled around my mind like a hurricane, but they didn't matter, not when I was this close. I had doubted that this whole adventure would lead to anything, but there was no denying it now. I turned the map over in my hands, searching the back and the corners for what to do next, but there was nothing. The old man had told me the map would also guide me to the center of the labyrinth, but I saw nothing that would help me the rest of the way. Find me, a voice suddenly whispered in the wind. I jumped so much I nearly tore the map in half. I turned on the spot and searched for whoever had spoken, but I was in an empty field. There wasn't another person in sight. "Find me," the voice whispered again, more urgently this time. I turned again as I realized where the voice was coming from. It was speaking from within the labyrinth, a voice born on the wind that breathed out of the labyrinth's depths. Swallowing my nerves, I took a hesitant step into the labyrinth. The world exhaled. Everything fell silent. Glancing over my shoulder, my face paled in an instant. The massive archway I had just stepped through had vanished. Instead, I was staring at a section of wall made of flat, dark stones that towered overhead, disappearing into the sky. I stumbled forward and pressed my hand against the wall, pressing hard and breathing fast. "No, no, no, no," I muttered in a panic as I felt all around the wall, looking for a way to get back out, but to no avail. After a few minutes of fruitless efforts, I sat down in the dirt with my back against the wall, wondering what I should do now. I took several slow, deep breaths and managed to ease my sense of panic. As I calmed down, I began to examine the area around me. There were 3 paths, leading left, right, and directly ahead of me. Each one stretched into shadows. I looked down at the useless map in my hands. To my shock, the map had changed. The instructions that had been there, that had led me to the labyrinth's entrance, had gone. Now there was a detailed drawing of the labyrinth itself. As I watched, I saw that the illustration was still growing, the black lines spreading as though sketched by numerous invisible hands. As I watched in awe, the black ink filled the page until the full labyrinth was drawn out, an intricate spider's web with a large, empty square at its center. "Find me," the voice whispered once more. It sounded familiar, but I couldn't place it. I swallowed hard as I tried to wrap my head around what was happening, then nodded once as if I just convinced myself to continue. The map clearly marked the center of the labyrinth, and I noticed tiny dots following the path to my left. Without another moment of hesitation, I turned and followed the directions, moving quickly but cautiously into the hidden depths. As I followed the map's instructions, I heard the grinding of stones frequently and could swear that whenever I looked at the map it had changed slightly. There was no way of knowing what the other halls contained, but I could hear things lurking in darkness, stomping and slithering out of sight. I was certain they could hear me too, maybe even smell me. I didn't want to think about what would happen if I wandered down the wrong path. There came a point, after hours of wandering, where my path split into 2 corridors. The map clearly told me to go right, but I felt a strong pull to go left instead. I had no idea what was down that path. I had no reason to veer off the safe route and pursue whatever was down that way, but the desire was almost overwhelming. I took a single step to the left, staring wistfully into the darkness. "There's something incredible down there," I thought. Whatever strange force was calling to me felt as familiar as going home after a long time away. It called to me. Not in words, but in a way I could feel, like a thought I didn't remember having, a memory I'd never lived. But it was as dark as any other path, and utterly, deathly, silent. Despite this, I could almost swear the air felt warmer down that path. I took another step forward, dreaming of what wonders might be that way. "Find me," the voice whispered again, louder. I snapped out of my dreamlike state. I turned and hurried along the path the map told me to go, already forgetting about the alluring alternative route that had called to me. I lost track of how long I had been walking, though it felt like days. I rounded another bend and saw the infinitely large hall widen, revealing a bright silver light. I gasped slightly as I realized this was the center of the labyrinth. I'd made it. Stumbling forward, I fell to my knees on the grass before a raised platform that marked the center of the maze. Wiping the sweat from my eyes, I glanced around, taking in my unremarkable surroundings. The only thing in the courtyard to see was the platform in front of me and the tall, shining object standing atop it. The light seemed to emanate from the object itself. It had an ornate frame made of silver, which twinkled enticingly. The frame held a simple, full-length mirror. I stared up at the mirror with growing confusion. Was this it? This was the prize. "Find me," the voice whispered again suddenly, this time with much more insistence. I flinched at the sound, as it was louder than ever before, and it sounded as if it came from the mirror. This time, now I was so close, I recognized the voice. It was mine, speaking out of the mirror with urgency. The hairs on my arms and the back of my neck stood on end as I stared with wide eyes at the mirror. The surface seemed to shimmer like a small pond reflecting the light of a full moon. I slowly moved closer, unblinking, as I climbed onto the stone platform and stepped in front of the mirror. When I looked at my reflection, I gasped. Where my reflection should have been, there was instead a strange yet familiar face. The old man from the office, who had encouraged me on this adventure, stood in the mirror, looking out at me with a hard and hungry gaze. "Hey, young blood, you found me," the old man said with a grin. He spoke with my voice. "What? How?" I stammered. What's happening?" I suddenly felt an ice-cold sensation grip my chest. I gasped from the shock of it and clutched a hand to my heart as I stumbled, almost falling to my knees. Glancing up, I saw the old man in the mirror begin to change. His white hair began to fill with color, becoming light, brown and thick. The wrinkles on his face began to fade and his skin became smooth. I looked down at my hands and my breath caught in my throat. My skin was shriveling before my eyes, the color draining fast, my fingers curling like brittle twigs. My veins pressed against thin and papery skin, my hands weak and trembling. "Help," I croaked, looking up at the old man in the mirror. But the old man didn't look old anymore. As I stared, finally falling to my knees as my legs suddenly became too frail, I saw that the old man had become more youthful in only moments, becoming decades younger. What truly horrified me, though, was the old man's new, youthful face. It was mine. I reached up and touched my face with trembling fingers. I felt my cheeks had hollowed out and the skin around my neck and jawline seemed to hang loose from my bones. "Sorry, young blood," the man in the mirror said with my voice now wearing my face. "You should have looked for yourself. The road not taken, am I right?" I felt a sudden invisible force begin to pull me towards the mirror. I screamed and clawed at the stone platform beneath me, trying desperately to find something to grab hold of. I felt myself being dragged towards the mirror and I screamed even louder, my eyes bulging out of my suddenly ancient face. I tried to crawl away, but the invisible force was too strong and my now aged body too weak. Looking back, I stared in horror as my feet touched the mirror. But instead of hitting glass, they simply vanished inside, as if I had sunk my feet into a dark ocean. Screaming even louder, I thrashed and tried to pull myself free. I desperately tried to grab hold of something. I dug my fingers into any crack in the stones I could find. My fingernails snapped off as I was dragged with irresistible force, leaving thin trails of blood on the stone as I continued to claw for help. The man in the mirror, who now looked exactly like I had, watched as I slowly sank into the mirror. I screamed the whole while, thrashing and clawing at the ground as first I sank into the mirror up to my knees, then my waist. I still screamed and flailed when I was in up to my chest. Finally, the screaming stopped as my head vanished into the mirror, though one hand still protruded through the mirror, bloody and frail, searching wildly for something to grab onto until even that had gone. Once the labyrinth's courtyard was silent once more, the man who had taken my visage pressed his hands on his side of the mirror and pushed, emerging easily from the mirror and stepping out into the cool air. He turned around and looked back into the mirror, admiring his reflection. With a smirk, he smoothed out his new hair. He then looked down at the ground and saw the ancient map. With a grin, the man reached down and picked it up and tucked it into his jacket pocket. Then he turned and walked away, whistling casually as he vanished into the darkness.